Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 630. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about national parks, history, and the Green Necklace, the Freedom Trail, swan boats, and Fenway Park as we go to Boston, Massachusetts.
Heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about one of my favorite cities, Boston. I'd like to welcome back to the show Lillie Marshall from AroundTheWorldL.com and TeachingTraveling.com. Lillie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back.
And Lillie, who is one of my Boston friends, is come to talk to us about Boston, where she currently lives and has lived for a while.
My whole life.
Except for the year or so you spent on the road.
That's right, around the world.
And there you go, from which the blog gets named. Excellent. And why should someone come to Boston?
So part of why I traveled around the world in 2009 to 10 was to find a better city than Boston, because I'd lived there my whole life and I thought there must be something better out there. So I tried on all these different cities. I had high hopes for certain ones. And at the end of the day, what I realized is Boston is the city of my heart. It's a beautiful green city. It's got both a river and the ocean front. It's got an amazing education scene. It's known for all of our universities and colleges, but it's also got a vibrant arts scene as well and cultural scene. Above all, I love that it's walkable. So when you're visiting a city, it's nice that you don't have to rent a car. You can just walk around, and the things that you can see just with your feet are top notch.
Definitely a walkable city. Not so much a drivable city, but it's definitely a walkable city. Well, and we have done a show on Boston, but it has been a long, long time ago. In fact, it was episode 112, so that makes it about 10 or 11 years ago.
Wow.
Since we did that show, probably 10 years ago. And in between when we recorded that episode and now, I have spent 4.5 years commuting to Boston
with an office with my name on it in Boston, the year and a half as a TripAdvisor employee and 3 years as a contractor. So I know a little bit more about Boston than I did last time we did the show, too.
So you'll be able to chime in as well.
Absolutely. And completely disagree with whatever you may say.
Exactly.
So what would you recommend for an itinerary for Boston?
It really depends, as with everything, with what a person is interested in. But because Boston has so much to offer and the surrounding areas have so much to offer, I would suggest splitting half the time in Boston and then half in the surrounding area.
Okay.
And I can talk more later about the places in nearby New England that are great to be near. But I think that half and half balance is nice.
Okay. And where are we going to start in Boston?
In Boston, my favorite place for people to start is starting right in Back Bay around Copley Square. And you can do this walking loop around Newbury Street down to the Public Garden, and then turn around and go down the Esplanade around the Charles River. And then when you hit Mass Ave, get back to Copley. So this is a longish walk, but there are plenty of places along the way to stop to eat and to see and to window shop. And why I like this as a starting place for Boston is that it's not a traditional thing to do or see, like you have to see Fenway Park or you have to go to Faneuil Hall. It's just a way to get a feel for several neighborhoods of the city that are particularly beautiful, enjoyable, and delicious.
You're starting us on Newbury Street, which is part of the delicious part of it. Shops and restaurants and such on Newbury Street. Are there any particular things we should do or see while we're there?
So Newbury Street is known for kind of a European feel. It's got trees, it's got outdoor cafes, and in terms of specific places, what I would say to look for is the green space. When you stop at the Public Garden, you'll see the famous swan boats. And that in many ways is the heart of the city, this central green space. But it's part of a larger network of parks called the Emerald Necklace that stretches like a green necklace throughout the whole city. And a nice place to start is walking around those beautiful swan boats. There's a bridge there where my husband proposed to me.
Oh, that part I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah. But I almost wouldn't even recommend a specific place because there are so many different options along the way that it's really more the totality of it. And then getting to the green space of the Esplanade along the Charles River and watching all the sailboats go by, seeing Cambridge across the river, just gives you a feel for the city as you look out over MIT and then down the river towards Harvard.
You had us at the Boston Gardens, which is right next to the Boston Commons, if people are familiar with that, where people no longer graze their cows, but used to, in the public commons there. But then you took a north here and went up to the Charles, which separates Boston and Cambridge. In fact, I think we're practically looking across the street at MIT at that point. It's a little to our left. Harvard's out of view. It's up a little further away, as some of the other schools up in Cambridge are. And you're heading to the right and to the north up along the Esplanade. So what is the Esplanade when you talk about the Esplanade?
So the Esplanade is a beautiful green space along the Charles River. It's got some playgrounds if you've got kids. It now has a few places to eat. If you're into photography, if you're into Instagram, if you're into just being at where the water meets the land, it's one of the most beautiful places in Boston. And if you are particularly enterprising, you can walk across the bridges that connect Boston to Cambridge. And the view that you get from there of the skyline, you can see the golden dome of the State House, is wonderful.
And we were closer to the State House when we started than we are by this point. So it's back behind us here. So there's also the Hatch Memorial Shell. I don't know if you have done it, if this is something that only those of us from out of town have done, but I have done the 4th of July in the park with the Boston Pops with 300,000 of my closest friends. And the 1812 Overture and the National Guard providing the howitzers, which was memorable, although I would say a little claustrophobic.
Yeah, I did it. I remember in high school lying on my back there, watching the fireworks coming out and then taking that long walk back with, as you said, a few 100,000 of our closest friends. But they have all sorts of performances out there on the Hat Shell, not just the 4th of July, but that's an excellent place to catch outdoor music. And that's an example of all of the arts programming that's started to pop up throughout Boston.
Mhm.
Boston is starting to take advantage of its outdoor space. This summer, there's been a bunch of fitness programming as well outside. If you're headed to the city, it's worthwhile to take a look at the main Boston sites and see what free events are happening. There was recently just Zumba in one of the Emerald Necklace Parks.
Yep.
The Pops played in Franklin Park outside for free. The outdoor space of Boston is part of what makes it so remarkable. And now that there's programming in it, it's a way to enjoy it on a deeper level.
Excellent. One thing that I'm going to suggest for people that is a bizarre thing to do, if you're over in the area that we're talking about in the Esplanade, there is a luxury hotel that I want you to peek
I have
inside.
I have to talk about it.
Okay, you do it.
He's stealing my favorite part. So if you were to ask me where to stay or where to get drinks in a exciting and very unique atmosphere, there is a luxury hotel that is in a former jail, and it's ironically called the Liberty Hotel. So if you go to the bar there, where I had my bachelorette party, it's called Clink, and you sit inside the old drunk tank cells. And the rooms in the hotel are part of the jail. And there's an amazing atrium with a huge dome where I once went to a fashion show there. But even if you just walk through it and don't stay there, it's some of the most unique architecture in Boston, but it's also representative of the best architecture in Boston, which takes our deep and long history and modernizes it in a unique way.
Well, and you say an old jail, an old stone jail that had a fair amount of character. Even, I imagine, as a jail, it was probably a fairly good-looking jail, but it makes a better luxury hotel, I'd have to say.
That's a good point. When you say jail, you don't always picture the beauty of this particular building.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Where to next?
So you have to go to Harvard if you're in Boston. Harvard
Okay.
is technically in Cambridge, but it's really part of the totality of the metro area. And again, if you're up for walking or biking, one of the most enjoyable things to do in Boston is to cross that bridge on foot or on bike or perhaps even on scooter and walk right into Harvard Square. You'll often see the rowers practicing along the river. And when you get to Harvard Square, there's the classic thing you're supposed to do of rubbing John Harvard's foot, the statue of John Harvard. However, the backstory is that drunken Harvard students also pee on that foot. So that may not be an advisable thing to do. But what I want to point out for people is while Harvard Square is fun, there are nearby squares that are much less frequently visited, but have excitement of their own. So, for example, I just did a mural arts and food tour of Central Square, which is a short walk or bus ride or train ride from Harvard Square. And Central Square has something that's called Graffiti Alley, where it is one of the few places where it is not only legal, but encouraged to do graffiti art along the walls. So if you walk into this alley, there's a almost stained glass roof, and every day the walls have different pictures painted on them by different street artists.
And when you're in Central Square, we're halfway between MIT and Harvard over there in Cambridge. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I haven't been there. I know I've been through there, but I did not know about Graffiti Alley. Excellent.
Well, anyone who is into photography in any way, be it for Instagram or your own personal photography, this is the place to go for remarkable photos. And if you want to be really epic, you can bring your own can of spray paint and spray, and it's all good.
All right. Where are we off to next?
In addition to our universities and our famous hospitals, Boston has a number of museums, which are world class. So the most famous is the Museum of Fine Arts. And that is also located right by the Emerald Necklace. So if you wanted to walk that, you could as well. And it's got a wonderful range of art. Did you ever go there when you were in Boston?
No, I did not.
Even wandering along the building itself, you can tell I'm an architecture geek, has all of this wonderful white marble, an atrium, atria, I guess you would say. But they also have a lot of programming as well. For example, I went to a number of film festivals there with pretty affordable prices to go in. And now you're making me think about another place that looks like a museum that's not a museum, but I always bring people here, and it's back in Copley Square, and that is the Central Boston Public Library.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been inside the main building?
Sounds familiar, but I wouldn't swear to it. Lots of trips.
So you walk into Copley Square, and it's got famous Trinity Church, which is sort of red brick, and next to it is what used to be called the Hancock Building, which I will still demand to be called the Hancock Building, which is the tall, glassy building that reflects the old church. And you walk up these big steps into the Copley Library, the Central Library of Boston, and you walk up marble stairs inside past roaring marble lions, and then into the main reading room, which you probably have somewhere seen pictures of. There are emerald green lights lining the entire thing and a huge arch above you for the whole length of the big room. And just standing there, it's free. Just go, just take it in, take a picture. But it's one of the most beautiful buildings in Boston. And then if you walk out into the modern wing of it, there's a new teen room, there's a new kids room, and they're just spaces to relax, look out over the glass into all of Boston's busiest area. And there's a coffee shop in there now, and they also record live radio shows there too. So it's worth a visit, even though you may not think of the library as the number one place to go.
All right.
Another museum, if you're into it, is the Institute of Contemporary Art, the ICA Museum. And so that's out in the Seaport area, which, to be frank, is full of what people have been calling B- architecture in its new renovation. The Seaport itself is a somewhat problematic new addition to Boston, but it has some highlights, including the ICA. So one of the cool things with the ICA is it has a room where you feel like you're looking out over the water, like you're sort of stepping out over the water because it's right on the waterfront. And they have a rotating set of exhibits that are, some of which are very exciting.
So we are now down southeast of the main thumb that is downtown Boston, past the Boston Tea Party Museum, which is kind of the last place that visitors used to go. This used to be all warehouses, as I recall.
Exactly. I remember as a kid walking through there, and it was fish piers, and it just smelled like fish, and it was sort of these ratty old buildings. And now it is all steely, sparkly, glassy buildings.
Okay. Now, if we walked the area you were talking about so far in one day, we've walked quite a long ways. There are some alternatives to that.
Boston has the first of a number of things, but we also have the country's first public transportation. So it's called the MBTA. You may know the Charlie on the MBTA song, which is an old song about a man who couldn't get off the train because he didn't have the fare.
Because they had raised the fare and he didn't know it, yes. The MBTA Municipal Train Association protest song, I think, is the official name for that song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and his wife would hand a sandwich through the window every day, but neglected to hand the fare, I guess. That was always a hole in the song that I saw. Have a lot of love for the tea, but the warning I'd give for visitors is do avoid rush hour on the tea. It gets extremely squishy, and it gets a little bit stinky as well. As the nation's first public transportation system, we're working with what we have, and it's got a lot of good to it, but it also has some rickety points. So number one in Boston, I'd say walk whenever you can. Number two is try to take the T at least once. Give it a try. It has both buses and trains. Mm-hmm. And then the Uber or Lyft or sometimes taxi are fine. But I would say whenever you can avoid driving, avoid it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Well, when we talk about the T, it's different lines have different ages too. And so, for instance, the Green Line, which goes out to the west, is a trolley car line most of the way above ground, although it goes underground as it goes to downtown. But I think that's one of the older lines, as I recall.
Exactly. Yep.
Excellent. Where to next?
I am not a huge sports person. I'm sorry. But people who love sports love Fenway Park. So I have to mention it, right? Did you ever go to a game when you were here?
I tried. It is not easy to get tickets to Fenway. You need to have a friend who's got tickets, I think.
Yeah, it's not easy, and especially now, I think it's particularly not easy to do it. So I have to mention Fenway Park. People, with the times that I've been there, even though I don't love sports, it's got a homey, intimate feel to it because it's one of the smaller parks. And the area that it's in has been completely changed over the past few years. So now there's all sorts of exciting places to eat and shop just right around there. It used to just be standard bars, and now there's a huge variety of items. I also have to mention the Freedom Trail. So there's literally a line along the ground that you can follow to go to historic sites in Boston. So it's a red line, you follow it, you can do any portion of it. One part of it takes you over a bridge into Charlestown, where the movie The Town was filmed there. So it has kind of a gangster past to it, but now is increasingly gentrified. But that has the Bunker Hill Monument, which is sort of like the Washington Monument.
Conveniently located on Breeds Hill, because the Battle of Bunker Hill didn't happen on Bunker Hill. But, other than that.
Well, so Boston is all into that of naming things something where it didn't really happen there. So, for example, a street will have one name, and then the street will just change names for no reason. So we change names. But the nearby Zakim Bridge, you'll notice, has a similar shape at the top of it to the Bunker Hill Monument. So it's a nice architectural echo in our city.
So the Bunker Hill Monument, again, is where the Battle of Bunker Hill happened, even if that's not really Bunker Hill there. And there is a museum underneath there worth seeing. And then the other thing I think in Charlestown is the USS Constitution, the Old Ironsides, is there. I think those are the only two spots up there for the Freedom Trail, as I recall, but I'm doing this from memory. You can tell that you're not as much a history buff as I am, since you didn't get to the Freedom Trail till like 15 minutes.
Well, that's what I said. It really depends. I mean, Boston, like every city, has so many layers, right?
Well, and a couple other things I would recommend on the Freedom Trail, since I think we've established here that I'm the history buff, is the granary, for instance, is one of the oldest graveyards, and it's really right downtown in Boston, and it's where you'll find the grave, for instance, for John Hancock is buried there, Crispus Attucks is buried there, and I don't remember who else, but quite a few well-known names.
Totally agree with you. And while we're in that area, right nearby is the first hotel, longest running hotel in the nation, and that's the Omni Parker House Hotel. And that is the home of the Boston cream pie. That's where it was invented.
So that kind of history you like.
Yeah, delicious history, exactly, and architectural. But here's a little history piece. So it has all sorts of famous people who stayed there, including John Wilkes Booth, including Mark Twain, and then Ho Chi Minh, who took over Vietnam, worked there in the kitchen, and so may have worked on baking Boston cream pies.
Huh. Okay. That I did not know.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anything else we want to do in that downtown center while we're down in the Freedom Trail area?
I could go on forever, but I'd say just keep an eye on the buildings that have been refurbished. So another place that has a similar feel to the Liberty Hotel is the Ames Hotel. So that has taken a historic, beautiful old building, and it has turned it into a modern luxury hotel, but with special twists. So, for example, okay, you can tell I'm not a sports person. Famous hockey person from Boston, is it Wayne Gretzky?
Oh, well, Wayne Gretzky is a famous hockey person, but I didn't think he was in Boston. Bobby Orr.
Bobby Orr. Okay. So they have a room that is in the penthouse that is completely decorated for Bobby Orr. So they have all sorts of memorabilia for him, and you can sleep in a place where he himself has his decorations and slept, and it looks out over the city and is gorgeous.
Yes. 10 years for Bobby Orr in Boston. So I think we're right there.
I should probably corroborate that before you send that out.
I just looked it up.
So I think that's it for downtown, but I would like to talk about neighborhoods.
Well, and just before we leave that area, so the other things looking up on the Freedom Trail that are included in there, Boston Common, where we were already at the Boston Gardens just next door. The old State House is part of that. Faneuil Hall, which is also now the Quincy Market area, so it's right next to a very popular dining and shopping establishment there. The Boston Massacre site, the Old North Church, where you put one or two lanterns up there for Paul Revere's famous ride, and a couple other places, like Paul Revere's house.
Absolutely. Agree with all of those. And the North End, which is Little Italy of Boston, is right near downtown as well and is near Faneuil Hall. I just corroborated it is the Bobby Orr Suite at the Ames Hotel.
Excellent.
So while you're talking about Faneuil Hall and Quincy Market, I do want to say, if you were to ask what is the most visited by tourists that maybe shouldn't be, I actually would put a vote in for Faneuil Hall and Quincy Market.
Say it ain't so.
It is one of those places that it's in the guidebooks. It's easy to visit because it's right there, but locals don't always go there. Not as close to our heart as other places. It is near, however, a Holocaust memorial that is very powerful. It's made to look like smokestacks, and it has numbers etched in it of all of the people killed in the Holocaust and has smoke rising out of it. So you'll walk right past that if you go to Faneuil Hall or Quincy Market.
Quincy Market's not a bad place to grab a quick bite to eat is really kind of what I would say Quincy Market is
and
best
it has
for.
some nice live entertainment outside
That's
as
true.
well.
That is a good point. Yeah, absolutely. You can find some of the best street performers in the city in Quincy Market. How about the other trail that's downtown?
There is a Black History Trail. Is that what you're referring to?
That is what I was referring to.
Yeah, I actually have a whole article about it. Boston, if you see movies about Boston, it's usually white people with accents who are gangsters. So sometimes when I'm traveling in other cities, people will say, well, aren't you nervous to be in Boston? There are all these gangsters there. And sometimes people will make comments like, oh, there are Black people in Boston. But in fact, Boston is a diverse city, and it's increasingly more so. And there is a vibrant Black history in Boston, as it was a center for abolitionists since the beginning.
Well, the movie you want to see to get your Black History Boston fix is the movie Glory. And that's, in fact, the first site on the Black History Trail is the memorial to the 54th Memorial Regiment, the first Black unit in Civil War, or the first one at least to see action. And, of course, this is from the time of the Civil War, and so the memorial is predominantly to the white officer and with the Black soldiers in the background, but that is the first site on the Black History Trail.
So I have the article pulled up now, and it takes you around. We may have taken different tours. Starts there, and then it goes around the North End, where there's the Copp's Hill Burial Ground, where the earliest Black Bostonians were buried, starting around 1659, and into Beacon Hill, which is people have probably seen pictures of it. It's the red brick, the old-fashioned lamp.
Beautiful neighborhood.
Beautiful neighborhood. And that actually has rich African-American history with regards to Boston.
Well, and the other famous Black Bostonian that I mentioned but didn't point out earlier was Crispus Attucks, who was the only person killed during the Boston Massacre, or one of the people killed during the Boston Massacre.
He was the first, and then there were a few others killed.
Yeah, okay. But he was freed black men, as I recall. Excellent. Where to next?
So I would like to take us out, perhaps by tea, to some neighborhoods in Boston. What people need to know is if you just stay in downtown Boston and Back Bay, that's all really shiny and kind of European and full of colleges. But if you go out further, you start getting very different flavors. So, for example, one neighborhood would be Jamaica Plain. Jamaica Plain is historically both had a Latin quarter, and it's also had a hippie quarter, if you will. So if you go, you can get delicious Dominican food, and you can also get healthy grain bowls with veggies as well. It's got some great street art around the neighborhood, and the Emerald Necklace stretches through Jamaica Plain. So you can see both Jamaica Pond, which is glorious at any time of day, even with clouds. It's got a little island in the middle. It's very romantic. And then right next to that is the Arnold Arboretum, which is an expanse of rolling green hills and paths that's actually owned by Harvard University.
Excellent.
So if you want to splurge on a very cool place to eat in Boston, there's a place that a friend recommended to me called Tasting Counter. And if you know about tasting menus, they are sort of a splurge for dinner theater. So it's 12 or so courses of small bites that are extremely creative and created by chefs. But what makes Tasting Counter different is it's on a whole other level of creativity. And in terms of price, it's actually slightly lower than most tasting menus. So, for example, one of the dishes was it was tomato sorbet that had a fish on top of it and it had some foam. And the whole thing was extremely exciting. And it's all served in a round counter. So it's a very small, intimate restaurant where you can see right in the middle of these tables the chefs preparing everything. So while I wouldn't always recommend the Big Splurge as the main place that I recommend, it's one of the coolest places that I've eaten in Boston in years. And I think if you're up for a splurge, it is worth it.
Okay. Other places you would recommend as long as we're talking food?
Well, I'm actually curious what you would recommend. Does anything stood out to you in Boston in terms of food?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. Any place I've gone with you. It's so hard. There are so many different places to eat in Boston.
And that's what I'd say is that Boston's food scene is really exploding in an exciting way. And I would just say experiment, ask around. It's always changing is the other thing. So I'm somewhat hesitant to recommend one place or another place because things keep getting bought and changed into other things. And there's so many good restaurants now that I almost don't even want to preference one or two above another.
How about neighborhoods where you would go for some of the better restaurants? So would you go to Brookline? Would you go to Back Bay? Would you go downtown?
The South End has some really cool restaurants.
Okay.
So the South End is right next to Back Bay,
Okay.
but it has more of a historic neighborhoody feel, while Back Bay is a bit more polished and European.
Okay.
So one place I love in the South End is called Teranga, and it's Senegalese West African food in a really comfortable, beautiful atmosphere.
Okay. I don't know that I know West African food that well. I know East African food, but not West African.
I'd love to talk about day trips or side trips.
Okay.
So from Boston, there are a number of really wonderful side trips that can be done either as a day trip or for some of the slightly further ones as 1 or 2 night trips from Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So Boston has a number of exciting side trips that you can take that are right nearby. So one that I often like to recommend is Rockport, Massachusetts. So it's just under an hour north of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the classic New England seaside town, which means you can get lobster that's fresh and crawling. You can eat it as you look out over the ocean. There's a lot of fudge stores, which seems to be a New England seaside thing. And there's also both arts and places to hike right around there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think of the famous photography spot. There's one particular view.
Motif number 1.
Number 1, is it? Okay. I couldn't remember what the motif was. That is just lobster traps and things like that. If you see it, you may recognize a photo of that because that is quite a well photographed area there. Then there's some things even closer in there like Salem. Now, what is your view of Salem, Massachusetts? Because
Salem is extremely popular and known for its witch culture and Halloween. I would avoid it anytime it's going to be crowded like Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool to go to when it's not packed, but you will get trapped in hordes of people and traffic if you try to go during the high season because it's such a hot spot for that stuff. But I'd say stuff like Salem, there are all of these small towns around Boston that have delights to them. Mm-hmm. So for example, Beverly is sort of this random smaller town just north of Boston, but it's right on the sea. It's got a small beach. It's got cool places to eat. In some ways, you almost can't go wrong just kind of picking a small place, driving through there from Boston and seeing what you can explore. Of course, Cape Cod is one of the areas that's most known from Boston. So it's famous for summertime getaways. And if you don't want to drive, you can take a ferry from downtown Boston directly to the tip to Provincetown.
Oh, okay.
It's a delightful thing to do as a day trip or as an overnight time, because Provincetown is beloved to artists and photographers because it's known for having some of the best light in the country. And you can see sunsets from all sides because it's the curved tip of Massachusetts. It also has a vibrant arts scene and, of course, a food scene, as well as beaches. But it's nice to go even in low season, because in high season, Provincetown gets very crowded. They have theme weekends because they have a big LGBTQ community. And so they'll often have theme weekends. So if you go down to Provincetown and all you see is burly men, it may be beer weekend. You kind of want to get a heads up. Who am I going to see there? They're all great, but sometimes they get very crowded.
So you might want to check out the website for the CVB or something to find out whether the weekend is your crowd, for instance.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, and you mentioned Boston being green. You don't have to get very far out of Boston till it's all green and rolling hills and things. And so, I mean, Walden Pond is not very far away from Boston. The Minuteman National Park is very close there, and actually a nice little path as well. This is, of course, from Lexington to Concord, where the Minutemen stopped and turned back the British Army in 1775 and fired the shot heard round the world. There are actually 6 different national parks in the area that I would recommend. So Boston National Historic Park is the Freedom Trail, and we've talked about that. Minuteman National Park is great, especially if you happen to be there when they're doing any sort of reenactment. It's even more fun. And I've done that. I've been on the Lexington Common, for instance, when they're firing off the muskets and things.
Well, and I would say Minuteman Path, biking it is awesome. It is such a great biking path.
Yeah, it's a little too long to walk. It's more of a driving thing, or it would be an excellent bike route. It'd be much more fun than walking it like the British soldiers did with people firing at you. I would not recommend that. The John F. Kennedy National Historic Site is one of the smallest national parks in the U.S.
In Brookline.
It's a 2-story house.
Yeah.
Doesn't take very long to see, but that's where he was born.
And there's a great traditional Jewish food restaurant near there called Zaftig's.
Excellent.
Which means rotund and roly-poly.
Yeah, exactly. That's excellent. And then there's also one of the best industrial national parks, and that's the Lowell National Historic Park. And this is where America invented industry, or stole it from the British, really more accurately, figured out how to do clothing mills. And the cool thing about Lowell is the machinery is still working. It's the only national park I can think of where they give you earplugs so you can go in and go among the weaving machines and watch them work.
Wow.
And then also in terms of industrial heritage, there's the Saugus Ironworks National Historic Site, where you can see a 1700s restored ironworks, one of the first ironworks in the U.S., but this is a recreation of it because it went in disuse 2 centuries ago or so, but they've recreated that. And then for just getting out on a good summer day, Boston Harbor Islands National Recreation Area. Take a ferry from Long Wharf and get out to some of the islands, including one of the Civil War area forts out in the islands. Those are 6 national parks I would recommend in the area. And on the topic of JFK, I would also recommend the Presidential Library.
Yeah.
Just in general, if there is a presidential library in the towns you're going to, whether that person is of your political persuasion or not, or it doesn't really matter, they're all great. So I would highly recommend the JFK Presidential Library, which is south of the city on the way to Plymouth.
Yeah. And I would like to chime in on 2. You jogged my memory now. So Harbor Islands are so cool. They're each cool in their own way. There's one called George's Island that I used to go on field trips to when I was younger, and it's got a fort in it with a supposed ghost that goes through it. So of course, in middle school, we would all pretend to be the ghost and jump on each other. But it's just the feeling of romance out there, and even the feeling of taking the ferry out there is remarkable. And just on that note, there are all sorts of harbor cruises you can take. You can take a brunch cruise, a dinner cruise. You can take a jaunt in a boat that's kind of old-fashioned style, but it's worth an evening on the water, either on the sea in the harbor or along the Charles River. I don't know if they still have this, but they used to have gondolas to go along the Charles River.
Oh, I haven't
And you
seen
can
that. Okay.
also rent kayaks, which we did with our young son. And he really liked it. You get to kayak underneath the bridges, and you can actually kayak all the way out to the suburb of Newton, which is a great place to visit too, just to walk around and for food.
And I want to say that you pick up the kayaks right around the Science Museum.
So there's a number of different places you can rent them, right? There's some, Science Museum is very cool too. We haven't even talked about that. But,
There's so many things we haven't talked about. So
where we rented it was near MIT in Cambridge, but you can also rent it. We also rented it another time near Newton. So you can get on in different points. You also talked about Walden Pond, so a famous pond of Thoreau. And that is one of my favorite places near Boston. It is such a tranquil place either to swim across or to walk around under the trees. But I will say that if you're going on a weekend in summer, it does get jam-packed and sometimes gets shut down because so many people peed in it that the algae starts growing. But I take that as a good thing because while we want to protect nature, it's clear that people really love this nature, and that's why so many people go.
Well, and if you are a history buff, there are just so many different things that we can't mention them all. I mean, this is where so much of history happened in the U.S. And so you've got the Seven Gables house and things like that here, as well as just a lot of things happened in this area. Other things that you would do around the city of Boston.
All right. So Old Sturbridge Village is just an hour to the west. And that is, especially in autumn, a gorgeous outdoor nature place that has these outdoor and indoor reenactments of old times. And so we went with our kids, but honestly, I think it would be fun to go just as adults to wander in this space. And there's a yummy barbecue place nearby.
Well, and one of the questions we have with this whole episode is how far is too far to include? Because, for instance, we've done whole shows on Providence, Rhode Island, and that's closer than Sturbridge Village, for instance, and Hartford isn't much further, and Portland, Maine is only 2 hours away. And one of the advantages of this area, if you're not familiar with this part of the U.S., is you can go 3, 4 states, 5 states in a day and not really
no problem.
not cover that much ground. So this whole New England area, if you have extra time, you could add in easily going up to Bar Harbor in Maine, which we've done an episode on, or go up to Portland, or go to the Green Mountains in Vermont, or up to New Hampshire. I mean, there's just so much that you could do to extend this, as well as extending it down to New York. Are there other things that we want to cover in Boston and the vicinity?
Sure. Well, while we're talking about contrast to the city feel, right near Boston, there's Blue Hill. So that's kind of our biggest hill nearby. And of course, Boston was comprised of hills that were cut down to fill in the swamp. So we used to have more hills, but now Blue Hill stands as a great place to go hiking if you want to do a day hike. Then to the north, we have the Middlesex Fells, which also offer some great views of the city and give you that fresh air just a few minutes away from downtown.
Excellent. Anything else before we get to some of our wrap-up questions?
Well, I think it's important to note that, as has been mentioned a number of times on Saturday Night Live, on other spaces in popular culture, Boston has a reputation as being a racist city. And this is something that's important for tourism because it's costs the city a lot of money in tourist dollars of people who don't want to visit because they're concerned they won't be welcome. So I want to state that the city right now is in the middle of really examining this and starting a dialogue with all the different backgrounds in our city about how we can be a more inclusive city.
This is a funny one to me because now obviously I'm a privileged white guy, so I know nothing about this, but it hasn't ever been my perception. So it was a little surprising to me when Lillie said this is something she wanted to mention. It's like, oh, really? That's the perception of Boston? Okay. Because it's not at all my perception of Boston, but I am not someone who might necessarily notice. So
I'll be curious whether anyone who's listening has heard this about Boston. And it comes out of the history of we forced racial busing of white kids into black schools, black kids into white schools not too long ago, ending in the late 70s early 80s. And that created a lot of racial animosity in the city. There's a famous historical picture of a Black man being speared by a flag right in downtown Boston. And Michael Che recently in Saturday Night Live said that Boston is the most racist city he's ever been in. So the Boston Globe just did a multi-part series examining the numbers around race in Boston. And it's really been at the forefront of our mind right now. And in the Boston chapter of the Women in Travel Summit, it's actually going to be the keynote closing is this topic in New England in general. Because though we have this history of abolitionists
Right.
and freedom, we also have been a majority white area. And even with well-intentioned liberals, it can end up being either overtly racist or secretly racist. So I think this is a really exciting and positive time as these questions are being discussed, and they have definite implications for tourism in Boston and New England in general.
Well, and I don't want to end on that note. And so you also have 2 young kids, your kids' favorite places in Boston.
So kids' favorite places in Boston, the Children's Museum can't be beat. It's so cool. So there's floor after floor of hands-on things to play with. There's an entire construction room because we have a big Haitian American population. There's a whole section about Haitian culture. There's a dinosaur room. And it's right on Fort Point Channel. So the walk around the museum itself is really glorious. You can see there's often an art installation in the channel. You can see the downtown buildings reflecting off the channel. So my kids like to run around the Children's Museum, and then we go outside and we run along the water as well.
So this is, again, down by South Station, and again, not too far from the Boston Tea Party, which we talked about, referenced it as a place on the map, but didn't mention it, I guess in part because I'm not sure that it's worth it.
I mean, when I was a kid, we went there, and I remember saying, throw the tea into the sea. And there are people who are all dressed up. I mean, it might be worth a peek.
If you have kids, I would go. There we go. The prettiest spot in Boston. You're standing at the prettiest spot in Boston. Where are you standing, and what are you looking at?
I love the Arnold Arboretum. It's got something called Lilac Sunday on Mother's Day. It coincides with when all of the lilacs come out. So you can stand in this field of purple bushes all around you. And in autumn, it's glorious. But Boston Public Garden as well, with the weeping willows dipping into the glistening water in springtime, in autumn, covered with snow. I think I'm going to have to ultimately go with Boston Public Garden. I think it's beautiful.
Okay, well, and you mentioned snow, and we haven't talked about weather. You mentioned it being a green city, not all year round.
So we had a little incident a few years back with about 9 feet of snow. If you're planning travel to Boston, know that your plans may be somewhat delayed or changed due to giant piles of snow. But it can be kind of cool also because places get cozy. Some places will stay open so you can kind of walk from your hotel or your Airbnb and walk and get a cozy cup of coffee while you're looking out at this expanse of glistening white. I think it's kind of an exciting time to visit Boston as well in winter, even though plans can be a bit unpredictable.
Favorite season to visit Boston?
Autumn, hands down.
It was a gimme question. Okay.
Yeah. But you know what? I could really say all of this. I love this city so much. And I think that part of its charm is that each season is so different. So we go from 99 degrees on a day in summer to a perfectly crisp autumn day with golden and ruby colored leaves to 9 feet of snow to all of these glorious pink flowers bursting out everywhere. So it's the variety that's part of what's exciting. You know, people say, I live in LA, the weather is perfect all the time, but part of the excitement of Boston is it can be 80 degrees one day and 30 degrees the next day.
Best day of the year to be in Boston?
So the best day of the year in Boston, I would check what festivals are happening in Boston because there is a festival for everyone. For example, marshmallow fluff was invented in Somerville, which is right nearby. I'm going to consider it Boston. It's right next to Cambridge. And there is a fluff festival that you can go to. It actually just happened. There are fluff dancers, there are fluff challenges, there are fluff games. So, things like that. For myself, I never like to do what other people are doing. So for me, it's just kind of every day in Boston is the best day because it can offer something new.
Excellent. Well, marshmallow fluff, and in the last time we did an episode, we talked about the Great Molasses Flood. I'm going to let you look that one up. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Boston.
One thing that makes me laugh and say only in Boston is at the end of our long winters when people run out in shorts when it finally reaches 50 degrees.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's not just Boston, but yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you had to summarize Boston in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Educated.
Okay.
Colorful and walkable.
Okay. And when you say educated, we tried to name all of the colleges in Boston. How
We'd be here all day.
How close do you think we could come? So I got Boston University, I got Boston College, I've got Emerson, I've got Tufts, I've got MIT, I've got Harvard. I'm up to 6 at least.
I'm looking it up. You'd have to corroborate, but Boston itself is a location for 35 colleges, universities, and community colleges, and there are about 152,000 students at Boston's institutions of higher learning.
Wow. Okay. All right.
So this is another tip. Check when moving day is for the students because you do not want to come anywhere near Boston on that day.
Well, and also graduation week and things like that, you're going to have a lot harder time getting hotel rooms and things like that. So be aware of that calendar. Babson College. I got a friend who teaches at Babson, and I didn't mention that one. Okay, so excellent. Our guest again has been Lillie Marshall from aroundtheworldl.com, and we mentioned teachingtravel.com, but we didn't mention what it was.
Well, Teaching Travel is a porn website, which I don't run.
I'm sorry.
But
teachingtraveling.com.
Teaching Traveling.
Yeah, we're still leaving that in. But
yeah, no, leave it in. I'd love you to. So let me back up a little. Aroundtheworldl.com follows my own travels. I started this in 2009 when I took a leave of absence from being a teacher to travel around the world. But when I got back to America in 2010, my mother said, that site is all about you. What about other people? And so I started in 2010 teachingtraveling.com to feature the stories of other teacher travelers or people who combine education and seeing the world in all different ways. I've now interviewed over 300 people from around the world about how they combined global education. And it's really been amazing to connect with all of these different people. So if you're listening to this and you're someone who combines learning or teaching and travel in some way, even if it's just from one town to the other, I would love to feature you. So feel free to reach out to me at world Lillie, Lillie, or and either of my sites.
Excellent. Well, and we may mention that Lillie's been on the show before. We didn't say what she's been on talking about, but she was on talking about the Finger Lakes, but also about Ghana, where you were a teacher for a while. So that fits in well with the teachingtraveling.com. Lillie, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Boston.
I hope it comes through, and I hope people will consider visiting because I love this city, and I think that you will too.
In news of the community, I'm still looking for people to come with me to Africa, to South Africa, Botswana, and Victoria Falls next May. Check out amateurtraveler.com/Africa 2019. I had to laugh when I saw the short but pithy review from Titania on Apple Podcasts or iTunes that said, "Love this podcast. I can actually travel while on traffic." Well, kinda. I understand what you're saying. I hope it can make your commute a little better. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, same email, or you can leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. Also, follow us on Pinterest if you're a big fan of Pinterest. It's pinterest.com/Chris2X, and there's a link to that from Amateur Traveler. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.